Karen marched across my lawn, waving a fine notice in my face. $5,000 for a fence that wasn't even mine. Within minutes, the city inspector showed up, and what he said next. Karen's jaw hit the ground. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when I saw her striding across my lawn. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. She clutched a stack of papers in one hand, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the morning glare, and the other hand jabbed the air as though pointing out invisible crimes. "Do you think you're above the rules, Mark?" she snapped the second she reached me. She didn't even say good morning. I was crouched by the flower bed, gloves on, soil still under my nails. "Morning to you too, Karen. What's this about?" She shoved the top page toward me like it was a court summons. Bold black letters screamed across the top. Notice of fine, $5,000. I blinked. 5,000? For what? "For that eyesore of a fence," she said, spinning on her heel and pointing at the weathered wooden panels that stretched along the back of my lot. "Unauthorized installation. Clear violation of HOA policy. And don't act surprised, you were warned." I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my hands, trying to keep my voice even. "Karen, that fence was here when I bought the house. 2 years ago. It's older than my mortgage." Her lips tightened into a thin smile. "Ignorance of the rules doesn't excuse breaking them." Neighbors' curtains twitched. I could feel their eyes on us. This wasn't the first time Karen had made a scene, but this fine, it was outrageous. I unfolded the notice. Paragraph after paragraph of HOA citations, with a bright red deadline circled at the bottom. 30 days or legal action would follow. "This is insane," I muttered. "That fence has been standing for years. I didn't build it." Karen crossed her arms, floral blouse rustling in the breeze. "Then maybe you should have torn it down the moment you moved in. The board has voted and you're responsible." I stared at her, stunned. Responsible? For a fence I didn't even touch. Her voice grew sharper, carrying across the street. "Yes. And if you think you're going to weasel out of this with excuses, you've got another thing coming. The HOA rules are clear. You maintain and pay for everything on your property, no exceptions." I glanced back at the fence. Weathered boards, faded stain, leaning slightly from years of storms. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't dangerous either. Nobody had complained about it until Karen decided to make it her crusade. I tried reason. "Look, I can pull the records. The fence was part of the original property line. It's not new, it's not in violation. I'll show you the paperwork." Karen let out a sharp laugh, the kind that made my stomach knot. "Paperwork? You think a couple of old closing documents are going to impress the board? We have photographs, Mark. Proof that fence was altered." I narrowed my eyes. "Altered? By who?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "That's for you to explain. Unless you want us to move forward with collection." I felt the heat rising in my chest. She wasn't just accusing me of breaking the rules, she was setting me up. Across the street, Mr. Diaz from 2 doors down leaned against his porch railing, watching. Mrs. Harper peeked from behind her blinds. The whole block was waiting for my reaction. "Karen," I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice calm, "this is harassment. You can't just invent violations because you don't like me." Her smile turned icy. "Harassment? No, dear. This is accountability. Something you'll get very familiar with." She thrust the notice into my chest, forcing me to grab it. "You have 30 days to pay, or the HOA will pursue legal action. And trust me, we win these cases every time." She turned to leave, heels clicking on the pavement like gavel strikes. But halfway across the lawn she spun back, fingers stabbing the air. "And don't bother whining to your neighbors. They're tired of looking at that fence too." I looked at the faces behind the curtains. No one spoke. No one moved. Just silent eyes watching the showdown like a neighborhood soap opera. Karen smirked, satisfied with the silence. "See? They agree with me." I clenched the paper in my hand, jaw tight. "You're making a mistake." Her sunglasses slid down her nose just enough to reveal her narrowed eyes. "No, Mark. You made the mistake the day you thought you could ignore me." Then she turned sharply and marched back toward her house, every step radiating smug authority. I stood frozen on the lawn, the fine notice crumpling in my fist, the weight of $5,000 pressing down on me. My savings, my bills, everything flashed through my mind. 5,000 for a fence I didn't build. I glanced back at the fence again, tracing its crooked line. Something didn't add up. If Karen was this confident, if she really believed she could win in court, then she had something else. Some angle I didn't see yet. My stomach sank. She wasn't bluffing. And if I didn't figure it out, she'd drag me through the mud, and the HOA board would stand behind her. Karen's voice echoed in my head as she disappeared into her house. 30 days, Mark. Or we'll take everything. I tightened my grip on the notice, staring at the fence. Something about it suddenly felt off. I didn't sleep that night. The fine notice sat on the kitchen counter like a curse, its bold letters glowing every time I passed by. $5,000. 30 days. And behind it, Karen's smirk burned in my mind. I pulled out the folder from my home purchase. Deeds, appraisals, inspection reports, everything carefully filed. I flipped through page after page until I found the section about the property line. There it was. A dated survey map stamped by the county. The fence was marked clearly, running exactly along the boundary. It had been in place for decades. I exhaled, relief washing over me. Proof. Ironclad proof. The next morning, I caught Karen watering her front yard, hose in hand like a weapon. I walked over, folder tucked under my arm. Karen, I've got the paperwork. The fence is original. The county map shows it right here. I opened the folder, holding the map out. She didn't even glance at it. She just raised her sunglasses and gave me that familiar look, the one that said she'd already decided how this would end. Old maps don't override HOA rules, she said flatly. I frowned. This proves I didn't build it. I can't be fined for something that predates the HOA. Karen smirked. You really don't get it, do you? The board already voted. You can parade your little folder around all you want, but when the majority decides, it stands. That's how democracy works, Mark. Democracy? I said bitterly. This is a witch hunt. Her lips curled. Call it what you want. Pay up or we'll escalate. And escalate she did. 2 days later, I got an email. HOA board meeting, mandatory attendance. My name was plastered at the top of the agenda. The clubhouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee when I walked in that Thursday evening. Plastic chairs were arranged in neat rows, most of them already filled with neighbors. Some nodded at me sympathetically, others avoided my gaze. At the front, Karen presided like a queen at court. Beside her sat the other board members, 4 of them, shifting nervously in their seats. Karen tapped the microphone. Order, everyone. We're here to address Mr. Thompson's flagrant violation of HOA bylaws. Unauthorized fence construction, penalty set at $5,000. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. I stood, clutching my folder. That's not true, I said firmly. This fence was here long before I moved in. I have the county survey map right here. It proves the fence isn't a violation. I spread the papers on the table. The stamped map gleamed under the fluorescent light. Karen didn't even glance down. Instead, she leaned toward the microphone, voice dripping with scorn. Maps can be altered. Copies can be faked. We've taken photographs that clearly show changes to this fence within the last year. My head jerked up. What? That's a lie. From the back, a voice muttered, Here we go again. Karen snapped her fingers. Another board member, Mr. Lowell, slid a manila envelope across the table. She opened it with exaggerated care, pulling out glossy photographs. This, she announced, holding one up, was taken last summer. Notice the fresh boards? The stain? Proof of unauthorized modification. I squinted. The photo showed my fence, yes, but closer inspection revealed the truth. That's just where a section was replaced after a storm knocked it down, I explained. The contractor used new boards. I have the receipts. Karen's eyes narrowed. Unauthorized construction. Exactly my point. It wasn't construction, it was repair. I shot back. And repairs are legal. You can't fine me for maintaining something that's already there. The room buzzed. Neighbors whispered, some siding with me, others watching Karen's performance with fear. Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who lived 3 doors down, raised her hand timidly. Karen, if repairs are violations, then half the neighborhood is guilty. We've all had to fix fences. Karen slammed the gavel. Irrelevant. This case is about Mark's fence. I clenched my fist. So you're moving the goalposts. First it's unauthorized construction. Now it's unauthorized repair. What's next? Unauthorized breathing? Laughter rippled through the crowd, quickly silenced by Karen's glare. You think this is funny? She hissed. You think the HOA is a joke? We are the law here, Mark. And the law will not be mocked. The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Miss Patel, spoke up. Maybe we should hear the inspector's opinion before finalizing anything. Karen snapped her head toward her. We don't need outside interference. The board? Actually, another board member interrupted, I think that's a good idea. If the city inspects, we can settle this fairly. The room buzzed again. Karen's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. Fine. If that's what you want. We'll bring in a city inspector. But don't say I didn't warn you, Mark. When he confirms the violation, this fine will look generous compared to what's coming. Her words echoed like a threat. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding. A city inspector. Someone impartial. Someone who could see the truth. Relief mixed with dread, because if Karen was this confident, maybe she knew something I didn't. As the meeting adjourned, Karen leaned across the table, voice low enough only I could hear. You should have just paid, Mark. Now when this inspector shows up, you'll wish you had. Her smile lingered long after she walked away, leaving me with a folder of papers that suddenly felt like fragile armor. That night I spread everything across my kitchen table. Maps, receipts, photographs. I circled dates, highlighted repairs, checked every line of the deed. Everything matched. Everything was legal. So why did her confidence shake me? I looked out the window at the fence, lit faintly by the street lamp. It stood there like a silent witness, crooked and stubborn. And for the first time, I wondered if it was hiding a secret I hadn't uncovered yet. The next morning, I heard the rumble of a city truck pulling onto the street. My heart skipped. Karen was already outside, waiting with arms crossed. The inspector had arrived. The rumble of the city truck made my stomach knot tighter than any HOA letter ever had. The white pickup with the official seal parked neatly at the curb. A man in a reflective vest stepped out, clipboard tucked under one arm. He looked mid-40s, steady, the kind of guy who'd walked more yards and inspected more properties than Karen had written fines. Karen was already waiting at the edge of my lawn, arms folded, a wide smile plastered across her face like she'd just won a prize. Inspector Lewis, she called, striding toward him with the confidence of someone who thought she owned not just the neighborhood, but the whole world. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a serious violation here. I lingered by the fence, clutching the folder of documents I'd spent nights combing through. This was it. My shot at fairness. Lewis nodded politely, letting Karen lead him closer. She gestured dramatically toward the fence. Unauthorized construction, she declared. This man erected a fence without approval. We fined him $5,000, but he insists it's somehow exempt. Lewis jotted something on his clipboard, face unreadable. Ma'am, he said calmly, I'll hear both sides before making any notes for the record. Karen's smile twitched, but she recovered. Of course. I just thought it best to clarify the severity of the violation. He turned to me. Sir, your side. I stepped forward, nerves tight but voice steady. The fence predates me. It was here when I purchased the house. I have the county survey map, deed, even repair receipts when a section was fixed after a storm. I held out the folder. Lewis accepted it, flipping through with practiced efficiency. Karen leaned in. You'll notice the discrepancies. Old paperwork doesn't reflect recent modifications. Lewis raised a hand slightly, silencing her. I'll review this myself. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Someone impartial. Someone who wasn't on Karen's payroll of fear. Lewis walked slowly along the fence line, boots crunching against the grass. He measured, checked posts, noted angles. His tape measure stretched, retracted, stretched again. Karen hovered at his elbow like a shadow, whispering pointed comments. See how uneven that board is? Clearly amateur work. This stain doesn't match. Must have been redone recently. I followed a few paces behind, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, I kept my eyes on Lewis, trying to read the tilt of his head, the pause of his pen. Neighbors gathered at the edges of their driveways. Mr. Diaz leaned on his mailbox. The Harpers peeked out again. Even kids on bikes slowed to watch. The whole street knew Karen lived for drama, and today's episode had the best audience yet. Lewis stopped halfway down the fence, crouching. He ran his fingers along the bottom of the boards, brushing away weeds. His brow furrowed. Karen stepped closer, triumphant. Yes, exactly. You see the inconsistency? Lewis didn't answer. He extended the tape measure again, this time stretching it all the way to the corner post. His pen scratched notes across the page. My pulse raced. He could be writing violation confirmed. He could be sealing my fate. Karen turned toward the neighbors, stage whispering loud enough for everyone to hear. I told you. He thought he could sneak this past us, but the HOA always wins. I clenched my jaw. Lewis stood, walked further, then crouched again at the back corner where the fence met a line of overgrown brush. He pulled a small folded map from his clipboard and compared it to my documents. His head tilted slightly. The crowd leaned in. Karen's grin widened. Finally, Louis straightened, brushing off his knees. He glanced back at me, then at Karen. His lips pressed together as though he were fighting a thought. Karen clasped her hands, ready for her victory speech. "Well?" she asked sweetly. "What's the damage?" Louis tapped his pen against the clipboard. His eyes narrowed, scanning the fence one last time. And then, to my utter confusion, he chuckled. Not a loud laugh. Just a quiet, amused sound under his breath. Karen blinked, taken aback. "What's funny?" Louis didn't answer immediately. He walked back toward us, calm and measured, flipping through the documents once more. He stopped at a specific page, his finger tracing the seal at the bottom. Karen's eyes darted from his clipboard to my folder, panic flashing briefly before she smothered it with her usual arrogance. "What are you looking at?" she demanded. Louis looked up, expression unreadable. "Something interesting." My chest tightened. "What is it?" The inspector closed the folder, tucked it under his arm, and let out a long, deliberate sigh. "Let's just say," he said slowly, "this situation isn't what you think it is." Karen's smug smile faltered for the first time as the inspector turned toward the fence again, muttering words that froze the whole crowd. "Ma'am, this might not even be your property." The inspector's words lingered in the air like smoke. "This might not even be your property." Karen's laugh came too quickly, too forced. "Don't be ridiculous. Of course it's HOA property. We manage every square foot of this neighborhood." Louis didn't answer. Instead, he lowered his clipboard and paced along the fence again, eyes scanning each post as if he were reading a story written in wood and soil. The crowd followed with their eyes, shifting uneasily. I stayed silent, clutching my folders so tight the edges dug into my palms. Every step the inspector took felt heavier, more deliberate. Karen trailed him like a hawk. "You see those boards? Clearly replaced. Unauthorized. The bylaws are crystal clear." Louis knelt at the far corner, brushing dirt away with his boot. He pulled out a small measuring rod, stuck it into the ground, and compared it with the map again. His brow furrowed. Karen leaned closer. "Well, what's the verdict?" Louis glanced up briefly. "Ma'am, do you mind giving me some space while I finish?" Her jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. "Of course. I just want to be sure you don't miss any violations." Behind us, a neighbor whispered, "She's not letting him breathe." Another snickered. Karen whipped around. "Who said that?" Silence followed, curtains fluttering as faces vanished from windows. Louis stood, dusting off his hands. He walked back toward the middle of the fence and extended his tape measure across the yard again, anchoring it to a post. The metallic click echoed in the quiet street. "Interesting," he murmured. Karen tapped her foot impatiently. "What's interesting? That it's illegal?" Louis ignored her. He flipped to another page on his clipboard, running his pen along a line of text. His expression grew more serious, the earlier chuckle fading into something sharper. I swallowed. "What does it say?" He didn't answer me either. Instead, he traced a path on the ground with the tip of his boot, marking a faint line that didn't quite match the fence's position. Karen noticed too. "What are you doing?" "That's the property line right there." She jabbed her finger toward the fence like it was gospel. Louis straightened, eyes narrowing. "That's what I'm verifying." Her smile wavered. "There's nothing to verify. The HOA controls this land. Always has." But Louis's silence spoke louder than any rebuttal. The neighbors murmured again. Mr. Diaz cleared his throat. "Funny, I remember old Mr. Callahan saying the fence was built before the HOA even existed. Back in the 70s. Karen spun on him. "Irrelevant. Rules are rules no matter when it was built." Louis finally turned to her, voice calm but firm. "Actually, timing is very relevant. Structures built prior to an HOA's establishment are often grandfathered. And in this case," he flipped the page back to the survey map. "This fence is marked decades ago." Karen's eyes widened before narrowing again. "That doesn't matter. It was modified. That makes it subject to current rules." I jumped in. "The modification was a repair after storm damage. I have the receipt." Louis nodded slowly. "That would align with what I'm seeing. Only one section newer, not a full rebuild." Karen's voice rose, sharp with desperation. "So what? Repairs still require HOA approval. That's a violation." The inspector's eyes met hers, calm and unflinching. "Not when the fence sits where I think it does." The tension thickened. Even the kids had stopped fidgeting with their bikes, their wide eyes fixed on the adults. Karen forced a laugh louder this time. "You're seriously suggesting this isn't HOA property? That's absurd." We've governed this neighborhood for 20 years. Lewis tucked his clipboard under his arm, crossed to his truck, and pulled out a rolled-up set of county property maps. He spread them across his hood, the wind catching the edges. The neighbors leaned closer, curiosity overriding caution. Karen hovered at his shoulder. Those maps are outdated. The HOA has updated boundaries. Lewis shot her a look sharp enough to cut. HOAs don't redraw federal or county property lines, ma'am. Her face flushed crimson. I stepped forward, my heart hammering. So what are you saying? Lewis tapped a spot on the map with his pen. I'm saying this fence doesn't sit on HOA-managed land at all. It's right here, on a federally designated property strip. And if that's correct... He let the words hang. The neighbors gasped softly. Karen sputtered. Federal? That's absurd. This is a suburban cul-de-sac, not a military base. Lewis didn't flinch. Federal property comes in many forms. Utility easements, buffer zones, old survey strips. And this one's marked plain as day. Karen's voice cracked. That can't be right. Lewis folded the map calmly. We'll see. He walked back toward the fence, tape measure clicking again, every step deliberate. He planted the end at the corner post, stretched it to the sidewalk and checked against his notes. Then he crouched, dug his fingers into the soil and pulled up something half-buried. A metal stake, weathered but unmistakable, with numbers etched into the side. The neighbors leaned closer, craning their necks. Karen froze. Lewis brushed the dirt away, eyes narrowing as he compared it to the map. His lips moved silently as he read the numbers. Karen's voice was barely a whisper now. What does it say? Lewis straightened slowly, the stake still in his hand, and turned toward us. His voice carried across the hushed street. This marker confirms it. The fence isn't HOA property. It's sitting directly on a federal line. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. The inspector held the weathered metal stake high enough for everyone to see. Dirt crumbled from its edges, numbers etched deep into its surface. This, he said, his voice carrying across the cul-de-sac, is a federal survey marker. A murmur spread through the crowd. Neighbors whispered, craning their necks to catch a better view. Karen's face twisted, first in confusion, then defiance. That's just a piece of scrap metal. Probably left behind by a contractor. Don't let him fool you. Lewis shook his head calmly. No, ma'am. Contractors don't etch federal lot codes into their scrap. This is official. It matches the coordinates on my map. He brushed more dirt from the stake and tapped the engraved numbers with his pen. See these digits? They correspond with a federal property line, not an HOA boundary. Karen laughed too loudly, her voice cracking. Federal property line? In this neighborhood? Don't be absurd. This isn't Washington, D.C. This is Maplewood Estates. Mr. Diaz muttered from his porch, pretty sure federal law doesn't stop at the city limits. The neighbors chuckled nervously. Karen spun on him. Stay out of this. But the tide was turning. For the first time, the power in her voice didn't command obedience. It rang hollow, desperate. Lewis ignored the exchange. He knelt again, measuring the distance from the stake to the fence. His tape clicked as it stretched. 8 feet, 3 inches. Exactly as the county records indicate. He stood, brushing off his hands. The fence isn't HOA property. It sits on a federally designated easement strip, established in 1974. The crowd erupted again, whispers overlapping. 70s. Before the HOA? Then she has no authority. Karen's face flushed deep red. No, that can't be right. The HOA governs all land within Maplewood Estates. Our bylaws are clear. Lewis finally turned to her, his calm voice slicing through her outrage. HOA bylaws do not override federal survey lines, ma'am. Her mouth opened and closed, fish-like, no words forming. I felt a surge of relief rush through me, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. This wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to retreat quietly. Sure enough, she regrouped, shoulders straightening. Fine. Let's say, for the sake of argument, this stake is real. That doesn't absolve him. He repaired the fence without permission. That's still a violation under section. Lewis cut her off, firm but polite. Repairs to federally marked property structures are not subject to HOA approval. They're governed by the county and, in this case, federal oversight. Karen's voice rose, shrill with panic. Federal oversight? Over a backyard fence? Do you even hear how ridiculous you sound? The inspector didn't flinch. He walked calmly to his truck, the crowd parting as he passed. He opened the back and pulled out a heavy tube, unscrewing its cap with deliberate slowness. From inside he withdrew a rolled set of property documents, the paper thick and yellowed with age. He spread them across his hood, weighted at the corners with small metal clips. The seal at the top gleamed in the sunlight. United States Department of the Interior. The neighbors gasped. Even I had to blink twice, stunned. Karen froze, her confidence faltering. That's fake. It has to be. Louis didn't even look up. He ran his finger along the lines of the map, tracing boundaries with practiced ease. Here's Maplewood Estates, platted in the late 70s. And here, he tapped a bold black line running behind my property, is the federally reserved strip. 40 feet wide. Surveyed, recorded, and still in effect. He lifted his eyes, pinning Karen with his calm, steady gaze. This fence sits directly on that strip. Her lips trembled. You can't prove that. Louis smiled faintly. I already have. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. Phones tilted upward, people recording, documenting. Karen saw it too, and for the first time, real fear flashed across her face. She lunged forward, jabbing her finger at the map. This doesn't mean anything. That's just lines on paper. HOA law is the only law that matters here. Louis rolled the map slowly, deliberately, and looked at her as if studying a child throwing a tantrum. Ma'am, he said evenly, if you continue interfering, this could escalate beyond an HOA dispute. Attempting to fine someone over federal property borders could be classified as harassment. Or worse, obstruction. The crowd went silent. The word obstruction hung heavy in the air. Karen staggered back a step. You can't threaten me like that. Louis tucked the rolled map under his arm. I'm not threatening. I'm stating facts. For the first time in weeks, I felt the balance shift. The weight wasn't on my shoulders anymore, it was on hers. She knew it too. Her bravado cracked just for a moment. Her hands fidgeted, her gaze darted to the neighbors recording her every word. But Karen wasn't Karen without a fight. She lifted her chin, voice wobbling but loud. This isn't over. The HOA will appeal. We'll bring lawyers if we have to. Louis tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. You're welcome to try. But lawyers can't erase a federal seal. The crowd chuckled nervously again. Someone clapped once before falling silent. Karen's eyes narrowed, her glare burning into me like a curse. Don't think this saves you, Mark. I'll find another way. I held her stare. For once I didn't flinch. Louis turned back to his truck, pulling out a smaller folder this time. He flipped it open and drew out a single page stamped with federal insignia. He smoothed it against the hood of the truck, the bold seal catching the light. The inspector looked directly at Karen, his voice firm and unshakable. This is the official federal property map, complete with signatures and seals. And it leaves no room for your HOA fines. Karen's face went white. The neighbors leaned forward, waiting for the blow to land. The federal seal glared up from the inspector's page like a warning flare. Neighbors leaned closer, phones raised, whispering as they recorded every word. Karen's face blanched, but she snapped back into performance mode with the stubborn energy of someone who refused to lose ground. This proves nothing, she shrieked, jabbing her finger at the paper. Anyone can print a seal. Anyone can make a map. I don't recognize this authority. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. One neighbor muttered, she doesn't recognize federal authority? Good luck with that. Karen spun, glaring at the bystander. Quiet. This is an HOA matter, and I will not be undermined in my own neighborhood. Louis's expression didn't change. Calm, steady, patient, but his eyes had sharpened, like a teacher tired of correcting the same student. Ma'am, he said evenly, this isn't an HOA matter anymore. This strip is federally designated. That means your board's jurisdiction ends at your property line. Any attempt to impose fines here is outside your authority. Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made my skin crawl. Outside my authority? I am the authority here. I have spent 15 years running this HOA, and I know the rules better than you ever will. She turned toward the neighbors, her arms flung wide as though she were rallying a crowd. Do you all want your neighborhood falling into chaos? Do you want people building whatever they want, wherever they want, just because some so-called inspector says a line on a map excuses them? Silence followed. The neighbors exchanged uncertain glances, but no one spoke. Not one person backed her. I finally found my voice. Karen, no one built anything. The fence has been here longer than half the people on this street. You're fighting a ghost. Her head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. Shut up. This is your fault. You think you're smarter than me, but you're not. You're nothing without this house, and I'll make sure you lose it. Lewis stepped between us, clipboard raised like a barrier. His calm voice cut through her shrillness. That's enough, ma'am. Karen froze, startled by his tone. Lewis flipped to another page on his clipboard. I'm documenting this conversation. You've been made aware of the federal designation, and yet you continue to pursue enforcement outside your jurisdiction. That is, legally speaking, interference. Karen blinked. Interference. Correct. His voice grew firmer. Interference with federal property oversight. If you continue, I'll have no choice but to file a report. The crowd gasped. Phones tilted higher, capturing her every twitch. Karen's lips trembled, but she forced another laugh. A report? Oh please. Do you think I'm afraid of paperwork? I have lawyers who eat inspectors like you for breakfast. Lewis didn't blink. Lawyers can't erase federal markers. Her laugh cracked. This is intimidation. That's what this is. You're siding with him because you don't like strong women standing their ground. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but my chest tightened. This wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was desperation. Lewis adjusted his stance, planting his boots firmly on the pavement. Ma'am, this isn't about personalities. It's about the law. And the law is not on your side. Karen's voice dropped to a hiss. You think you can embarrass me? In front of my neighbors? In front of my board? Lewis tilted his head, almost pitying. Ma'am, you're doing that yourself. The crowd chuckled louder this time. Karen's face flared crimson. She spun toward the cluster of neighbors. Stop laughing. Stop recording. This is private HOA business. Someone shouted back, not if it's federal, it isn't. Karen's shoulders trembled with fury. She stomped closer to the inspector, jabbing her finger at his chest. I don't care what papers you have. I don't care what map you're holding. If you think you can override the HOA, you're in for a fight. We'll sue the county. We'll sue you. We'll sue anyone who gets in my way. Lewis didn't move. Didn't flinch. His voice was quiet, but every word carried. Ma'am, step back. Karen froze mid-gesture. Lewis's eyes hardened. This is your final warning. If you persist, I'll call for police assistance and file a federal interference report. That carries consequences far beyond HOA fines. The murmurs in the crowd swelled. Words like police, federal, consequences buzzed from neighbor to neighbor. Karen looked around, realizing the crowd wasn't with her anymore. But retreating wasn't in her nature. You're bluffing, she spat. You wouldn't dare. Lewis pulled his radio from his belt, pressing the button with a calm click. Static filled the air. This is Inspector Lewis requesting local unit support. Possible interference at Maplewood Estates. The street went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. Relief mingled with disbelief. Could this really be happening? Karen finally found her voice, shrill and broken. You can't call the police on me. I am the authority. But the neighbors weren't buying it anymore. Mrs. Harper stepped forward, her frail voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. No, Karen. You're just a bully. And we're tired of it. Karen's face collapsed, her power slipping through her fingers. Lewis spoke again into the radio, his eyes never leaving her. Unit will advise. Possible charges may include harassment and obstruction. The words hit like hammer blows. Karen staggered back, pale now, her bravado cracking into something raw. The inspector lowered the radio, his gaze steady. The police are on their way, ma'am. You might want to think very carefully about your next move. The crowd erupted in whispers, phones recording every second, as the distant wail of a siren grew closer. The faint wail of the siren grew louder, winding its way through the suburban streets. Neighbors shifted nervously, phones held higher, eager to catch every second. Karen stood rigid, arms crossed, her jaw set tight. But her eyes darted, from the inspector to me to the crowd recording her unravel. The police cruiser turned the corner and rolled to a stop in front of my driveway. The sound cut off with a sharp click as two uniformed officers stepped out. One was tall and broad-shouldered, the other younger, scanning the scene with cautious eyes. Karen sprang into action. Officers. Over here, she cried, rushing forward like a victim running toward rescue. Thank God you came. This man, she jabbed her finger toward me, has violated HOA laws and is refusing to comply. And this so-called inspector is harassing me on my own street. The officers exchanged glances. The older one raised an eyebrow. All right, ma'am. Let's take this one step at a time. Lewis stepped forward, calm as ever, badge clipped to his vest catching the afternoon light. Officers, Inspector Lewis, City Planning and Property Division. I was called here on an HOA dispute regarding this fence. He gestured toward the wooden panels behind us. What I found is that this fence sits directly on a federally designated property strip. The HOA has no jurisdiction. The younger officer blinked. Federal? For a fence. Lewis nodded. Survey marker confirms it. Federal seal on the map. Attempted interference by the HOA. Karen's face reddened. He's lying. He's siding with the homeowner because they're friends. This is corruption. You need to arrest them. The crowd erupted in laughter. Even the officers smirked. Ma'am, the older officer said carefully, we don't arrest people for fences. Karen whirled on him. You don't understand. If you let this go, the whole neighborhood falls apart. What's next? Pink houses? Junk cars on lawns? We'll be overrun. The younger officer scribbled in his notepad, his expression half curious, half amused. So you called a city inspector for a pink house that doesn't exist? Karen froze. That's not what I said. Lewis unfolded the property map on the hood of the cruiser, the federal seal bold against the paper. This is the survey line. Here's the stake I uncovered. He placed the metal marker beside it. The fence sits exactly on this strip. HOA jurisdiction ends here. The officers leaned in, scanning the page. The older one whistled softly. Looks legit. Karen's voice cracked. It's fake. It has to be fake. The younger officer looked up, raising an eyebrow. You're saying the Department of the Interior makes fake maps? A ripple of chuckles swept the neighbors. Karen stammered, her confidence slipping like sand through her fingers. I'm saying, this can't be right. It can't. The older officer straightened, folding his arms. Ma'am, you've been told it's federal property. If you keep pushing fines on this man, you could face charges. Karen recoiled. Charges? Me? I'm the victim here. Lewis's voice cut through her denial, steady and firm. No, ma'am. You're not the victim. You've been harassing this homeowner for weeks. You ignored county maps, you ignored records, and now you're ignoring federal documentation. That's not leadership. That's obstruction. The words hung heavy. Even the air felt thicker. Karen's gaze darted to the neighbors. Phones were everywhere. Recording. Watching. Judging. For the first time, the woman who ruled through fear looked small. But Karen wasn't Karen if she didn't fight to the bitter end. She jutted her chin out, voice trembling but loud. This neighborhood elected me. I have authority here. These people, she gestured wildly at the crowd, know I keep this place safe. Mrs. Harper, her frail frame steady as she leaned on her cane, stepped forward. Safe? You find me for a wind chime. You find the Diaz family because their kids left bikes in the driveway. You find Mark for a fence he didn't build. You don't keep us safe, Karen. You keep us scared. A collective gasp swept the crowd. For the first time, someone had spoken the truth aloud. Karen's face contorted. That's not the point. The younger officer closed his notepad. It seems like the point is pretty clear, ma'am. The older officer turned to Lewis. What do you need from us? Lewis nodded. Just acknowledgement. Document the incident, confirm the federal marker, and warn the HOA to cease interference. The officer nodded. Consider it done. He turned to Karen, voice firm. Ma'am, if you continue this, we'll have to take further action. And I don't think you want that. Karen's lips quivered, but no words came. She looked around desperately, searching for one ally in the crowd, but found none. For the first time, the Queen of Maplewood Estates stood alone. The older officer pulled out his radio, speaking into it calmly. Unit 7 reporting. Homeowner cleared, HOA interference noted. Possible harassment case pending. Karen's eyes went wide. Harassment case? She whispered, her voice breaking. The words harassment case pending echoed across the street, cutting sharper than any fine Karen had ever written. Her face drained of color. Harassment? Of me? No, that's impossible. I'm the one keeping this neighborhood in order. The older officer turned to her calmly. Ma'am, harassment isn't about who's in charge. It's about behavior. And based on what I'm hearing, you've crossed a line. Karen's jaw dropped. I have done nothing but uphold the rules. Rules these people voted for. She turned to the crowd, gesturing wildly. Tell them how much you appreciate me keeping your streets safe, your lawns neat, your homes valuable. But the silence that followed wasn't loyalty. It was exhaustion. Finally, Mr. Diaz stepped forward. His voice was steady, measured. Safe? Karen, you fine me $200 because my son left a basketball hoop out overnight. You called my wife at work and told her we were lowering property values. The crowd murmured. Karen's face twitched. That was a violation, she snapped. We have standards. Mrs. Harper leaned on her cane, her voice trembling but strong. Standards don't mean bullying. You humiliated me in front of the whole board over a wind chime. A wind chime, Karen. You said it sounded like a cheap flea market and made me take it down. I cried for weeks. Gasps rippled through the neighbors. Some shook their heads. Others whispered, I remember that. Karen's voice cracked. It was about noise ordinances. Nothing personal. The younger officer closed his notebook. Noise ordinances don't usually involve personal insults, ma'am. Another neighbor, a young mother holding her toddler, stepped forward. You told my husband our kid's sidewalk chalk was graffiti and threatened a fine if they didn't scrub it off by sunset. They were 4 years old, Karen. 4. The toddler gurgled, tugging at her sleeve. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more indignant now. Karen's eyes darted wildly. I was protecting the community. That's all. But her words no longer held weight. Every sentence sounded hollow. The inspector finally spoke, his tone calm but decisive. Officers, what you're hearing now is a pattern. This isn't about one fence. It's about misuse of authority. A federal marker was ignored. Property rights violated. Residents intimidated. He lifted his clipboard. That's harassment. The older officer nodded grimly. We've heard enough. He turned back to Karen. Ma'am, step aside. We're going to take formal statements from the residents. Karen shook her head violently. No, you can't do this. You don't understand. If you undermine me, this neighborhood will fall apart. It will be chaos. But no one supported her. Neighbors lined up, one by one, to give their stories. Mr. Diaz, Mrs. Harper, the young mother. Even quiet families who usually stayed out of conflict stepped forward, their voices steady, recounting fines, threats, intimidation. The younger officer wrote quickly, pages filling with testimony. The older one listened carefully, his frown deepening with each story. Karen tried to interrupt, shouting over them. Lies. All of it lies. You're just jealous of the order I created. Without me, this place would be a dump. But her voice was drowned by the steady rhythm of truth, each neighbor adding another stone to the mountain against her. Finally, even members of the HOA board, the very people who usually cowered under her dominance, stepped forward. Miss Patel, her voice trembling, admitted, we only went along with her because we were afraid. She threatened to ruin us if we didn't vote her way. The other board members nodded. She bullied us too, one confessed. Karen spun on them, betrayed. How dare you? You wouldn't have a board without me. Miss Patel lifted her chin. Maybe that's the problem. The crowd murmured in agreement. Karen staggered back, eyes wide, chest heaving. Her power was slipping through her fingers like sand. The inspector folded his arms. Officers, I think you have enough to note a pattern of abuse. The older officer nodded. We do. And we'll be escalating this to the proper channels. Karen let out a desperate laugh, the sound sharp and hollow. Escalating? To who? Who's above me? The inspector met her gaze evenly. The county. The state. And if necessary, the federal government. The neighbors erupted in whispers again. Phones stayed locked on Karen, recording every second of her unraveling. Her bravado cracked. This is my neighborhood, she whispered hoarsely, more to herself than anyone else. You can't take it from me. The older officer stepped closer, his tone calm but firm. Ma'am, no neighborhood belongs to one person. Not even you. Karen's knees wobbled, and for a second I thought she might collapse right there on the asphalt. But instead, she straightened, clinging to the last shreds of pride. You think you've won? She hissed, her eyes darting between me, the inspector, and the officers. This isn't over. None of you know who you're dealing with. The inspector raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. We'll see. The older officer gestured to his partner. Let's take her aside. Karen recoiled. No. You can't. The younger officer stepped forward, hand hovering near his cuffs. The crowd fell silent. Ma'am, he said carefully, if you don't calm down, we may have to take you in for questioning. Karen's eyes went wide, her defiance breaking into something that looked a lot like fear. The younger officer's words landed like a hammer. We may have to take you in for questioning. Karen froze. Her arms, which had been flailing wildly minutes ago, dropped stiffly to her sides. Her face, once red with fury, had drained pale. The Queen of Maplewood Estates suddenly looked small. No, no you can't, she whispered, her voice brittle. I've done nothing wrong. I was protecting this neighborhood. The older officer shook his head. Ma'am, you've crossed the line. You've attempted to fine a resident for property outside your jurisdiction. You've ignored federal documentation. You've harassed multiple neighbors. That's not protecting. That's abusing power. Karen's lips quivered. She looked around, desperate for support. Tell them, she pleaded to the crowd. Tell them how I've kept your property values high. Tell them how much safer you felt because of me. But the neighbors didn't answer. Instead, one by one, they folded their arms, shook their heads, or turned their backs. Phones stayed pointed at her, recording. Her power, once absolute, was gone. The younger officer stepped closer. Ma'am, please walk with us to the car. We'll give you the chance to make your statement at the station. Karen staggered backward. No. This is a mistake. You'll regret this. All of you. Her voice cracked on the last word, desperation bleeding through. The older officer gently but firmly took her elbow. She resisted for a second, then sagged, her energy draining away. The crowd parted as the two officers led her toward the cruiser. The once commanding Karen now looked like a defeated figure, swallowed by flashing lights and whispered judgments. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Relief poured through me, though my hands still shook from the adrenaline. Beside me, Inspector Lewis approached calmly, clipboard tucked under his arm. His voice was lower now, almost kind. You did the right thing, Mark. You stood your ground. I nodded, my throat tight. Honestly, I thought she was going to win. She had the whole board behind her. Lewis gave a small, knowing smile. Bullies usually do, until someone pushes back. The cruiser door shut with a heavy thud. Karen's voice could still be heard faintly through the glass, muffled and desperate. This isn't over. You'll see. I'll be back. The crowd stirred, murmuring. Some shook their heads. Others clapped softly, like a curtain falling on a play. Miss Patel, the board member who'd spoken up earlier, approached me. I'm sorry, Mark. We should have stopped her sooner. We let her control us because we were afraid. I gave a small nod. It's not your fault. She made it impossible to say no. Lewis pulled a folded document from his clipboard. The same federal survey map, stamped with seals. He pressed it into my hand. Keep this copy, he said firmly. If anyone tries this again, and they might, you'll have proof in black and white. I stared at the seal, the bold letters at the top. For weeks I'd felt powerless. But this page, this single sheet of paper, felt like armor. Karen's voice, muffled but still sharp, echoed again from inside the cruiser. I'll sue all of you. Do you hear me? You can't do this to me. The officers shut the other door, silencing her. The car's engine rumbled to life. The lights flashed once more, then the cruiser pulled away slowly, turning the corner until the sound faded. The neighborhood exhaled as one. Some neighbors clapped louder now. A few came over to shake my hand, pat my shoulder, thank me for standing up. Mrs. Harper smiled through misty eyes. Maybe now I can hang my wind chime again. The young mother with the toddler let out a relieved laugh. And maybe my kids can use sidewalk chalk without being treated like criminals. I felt something I hadn't in months, belonging. For the first time, the neighbors weren't watching me like a suspect. They were standing with me. Lewis checked his watch. I'll file my report tonight. The HOA will have no grounds to fine you or anyone else for federal property. If they try, they'll be the ones in trouble. I nodded. Thank you. Really. You don't know how much this means. He gave a half smile. I have an idea. I deal with Karens like this every week. But rarely do they get this public. We both glanced at the neighbors still recording. Karen's downfall was already on half a dozen phones, maybe more. Lewis handed me his card. If you get another notice, call me directly. And keep that map somewhere safe. Something tells me you'll need it again. The weight of his words hit me. I frowned. You think she'll come back? Lewis's eyes flickered toward the corner where the cruiser had disappeared. People like her don't go quietly. But now you know how to fight back. The crowd slowly dispersed, neighbors heading home, murmuring to each other about what they'd just witnessed. The street grew quieter, the adrenaline fading. I stood by the fence, the federal seal paper in my hand, watching as the last sunlight stretched shadows across the grass. For the first time, the fence didn't look like a burden. It looked like a victory. Just as I turned to go inside, a car pulled up at the end of the street. A sleek black sedan. The window rolled down halfway, and though I couldn't see the face clearly, I caught the glint of sunglasses watching me. My stomach tightened again. Maybe Lewis was right. Maybe this wasn't over. 4 days after Karen's meltdown, the neighborhood buzzed. Videos spread quietly through group chats. Some clips made it onto community forums, even a local Facebook page. HOA president loses it over fence, was the headline on one post. By the end of the week, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. This time the air in the clubhouse felt different. No tension, no fear. Just resignation. The board sat stiffly at the front table, avoiding eye contact with the crowd of residents who had finally found their voice. Ms. Patel cleared her throat. After reviewing Inspector Lewis's report and the testimonies from multiple residents, the board has voted to rescind the fine against Mark Thompson. Furthermore, she paused, glancing at her fellow board members. We are issuing a formal apology to him and to all residents affected by recent overreach. A murmur of approval swept through the room. And, she added, voice growing steadier, Karen has been removed from her position as HOA president, effective immediately. The room erupted. Some clapped, others cheered quietly, but the overwhelming sound was relief. Karen wasn't there to hear it. According to whispers, she was meeting with lawyers, but even they were struggling to take her case. Fighting federal documentation was a losing battle. When the meeting adjourned, neighbors came up to me one by one, shaking my hand, thanking me. Mrs. Harper hugged me, her eyes bright with tears. I hung my wind chime back up, she whispered. And no one can stop me now. The Diaz family smiled as their kids rode bikes freely in the parking lot outside, chalk doodles already returning to the sidewalks. For the first time since I'd moved in, Maplewood Estates felt like a community instead of a prison. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee. The fence stretched quietly behind me, weathered but sturdy. A fence that had once been a burden now felt like a monument, proof that standing your ground mattered. Inspector Lewis's card sat on the table beside me, the folded federal map tucked safely in my drawer inside. His warning echoed in my head, people like her don't go quietly. I glanced toward the end of the street, half expecting that sleek black sedan to appear again. But tonight the road was empty. Peaceful. The neighbors had begun reclaiming their street. Kids played without fear of fines. Lawns looked less like museum exhibits and more like homes. And the quiet laughter drifting through open windows sounded sweeter than any HOA meeting ever had. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. For the first time in weeks I felt free. And yet, a thought lingered. Karen might have lost her title, but people like her rarely disappear. Maybe she'd try another angle. Maybe she'd wait, watching, plotting a return. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had the truth. I had the proof. And now, I had a neighborhood that wouldn't stay silent. I took a long sip of coffee, savoring the quiet. And as the porch light flickered on, I thought about how quickly power can shift. How one piece of paper, one federal seal, could bring down years of intimidation. If there's one thing I learned, it's this: don't let anyone bully you out of what's rightfully yours. Whether it's a fence, a lawn, or just your peace of mind, sometimes you have to stand up even when it feels impossible. Because the truth has a way of shining through. What would you have done if your neighbor tried to fine you $5,000 for something you didn't even build? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more true neighborhood stories like this one, make sure you hit subscribe. Because sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in courtrooms, they happen right outside your front door. I set down my coffee, listening to the faint hum of cicadas in the warm evening air. And just before I went inside, I glanced at the fence one last time. It stood there, stubborn and unshaken. Just like me.